Live there? Live here. All right.
It's gonna count down.
It just told me you're live.
On where?
Instagram.
There we go.
Okay.
So we'll go with that one, I guess.
Hi, I'm Donna Cranston with Defenders of Freedom. I'm here with Dr. Charlene Gaudet. We are talking about brain injuries because this month, the month of March, is Brain Injury Awareness. So today, we are going to talk about the signs and symptoms of a TBI.
So there are a lot of signs and symptoms that we see with TBI, and this won't be a complete list, but this will be some of the more common ones that we see. You're going to see oftentimes sleep issues. Some people sleep 20 hours a day. Some people can't sleep for 3 days. You're going to see oftentimes headaches, lots of fatigue. What are some of the other ones that you see commonly with emotionality, uh, inability to regulate emotions very well? So one of the things I call it is crying at cat commercials. You're a person that never cried really on watching television, and now things like commercials make you cry. It's not just Hallmark movies. And what are some of the other ones that you see with the guys coming in?
Outbursts, I think,
Anger.
anger
Hmm.
outbursts, loss of memory. They can't remember a lot of things.
Yeah. That, and so the memory, it can be short-term memory, it can also be long-term memory. We've had some with, some amnesia that came in where they didn't remember anything up until the last 2 years, right? Everything had been, everything was gone. So memory can be short-term or long-term.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Balance issues.
Lots of balance issues. So when we say balance, we don't necessarily mean that, you're walking down the street and you fall over, although we all have those little invisible gremlins that we trip over the nothingness. But sometimes it's about just when you're trying to walk through a door and you misjudge the height. The step is only, a half an inch or an inch down, and you misjudge that and you trip. Or you're attempting to walk through a door and you catch it with a shoulder. Or you misjudge something in the kitchen where you leaned over and you came up and you caught the cabinet door with your head. So balance can be many different types of things.
Okay. I was trying to think of some other, those are the typical ones that
Hmm.
I see, I think, when I'm talking to veterans or trying to assess with them if they have something.
Right.
So is that pretty much the ones that you wanted to
Those
cover?
are I think those are the most common ones. We always, there's always the irregular ones that we see people with. Some people have hypertension, so now they have high blood pressure. And then we have just the opposite. We have people with hypotension, so now they have low blood pressure. And those people, are not always assessed the same. High blood pressure, they go to their general practitioner and they give them blood pressure medication and they try to regulate it. But low blood pressure, most of them are told, oh, you're fine, it's not a big deal. But every time they go from sitting to standing, they pass out. So it is a big deal because people who faint tend to get more head injuries. So hypotension and hypertension is definitely um, one of the major challenges I think we see.
Okay. And one of the things that is a little more subtle that we probably don't see and we don't know is until we do their chemistry and we find out that their hormones can be imbalanced.
Absolutely.
But that's not something that people might know.
Hmm.
They, which is exactly why we do the blood work.
Absolutely. So blood work is a huge part of therapy. If if your body isn't functioning, one of the things people think about when they think about hormones is, we all know about insulin. Well, insulin is one of the most common hormones, right? So if our pancreas isn't producing or our cells aren't able to regulate that insulin and glucose, then we go to the doc, they put us on medication, and nobody thinks twice about it.
Mhm.
But these are things that actually can be very brain related because your brain sets the tone and often kicks off and starts hormone production. So it's not just reproductive hormones; it's digestive hormones, it's sleep hormones, right? Your gut is supposed to make serotonin, right? Serotonin, that happy hormone for you, but throughout the day, that serotonin is converted to melatonin. So if they're not able to make that, then they're not able to sleep. So we see this is how they all kind of gets together, right? That's why we
Mhm.
see the sleep issue and we see the gut issue. Gut function is a big thing that we see a lot of challenges with.
Mhm.
People that have never really had problems with digestion, and all of a sudden they have heartburn all the time, and they have constipation, or they have diarrhea, or just whatever it is as far as gut challenges. That's a huge one that we see
Mhm.
with most people.
Okay, and that's exactly why we do the blood work too,
Hmm.
to be able to assess that. So, how are a lot of these injuries assessed? What do you do?
Right.
I mean, I can tell sometimes on the phone with some of them, but then
Yeah.
that's just my hunch,
Right.
and then we send them in. So, what protocols or what do you do testing wise to assess that they do have a brain injury?
So, well, the first thing, like you mentioned, is lab work. We want to see what their lab work looks like. We want to see what the chemistry looks like, because it's hard to get a brain to fix if the chemistry isn't correct, right?
Mhm.
So then when they come into the clinic, one of the things that we can do is we're going to assess their how their eyes track, because your eyes are actually, you get the most information from your eyes. We've all heard, the eyes are the windows to the soul. They're a little more than that, right?
Mhm.
They affect every part of your brain. So we're going to do an eye tracking assessment. And then, because you mentioned balance, balance is one of the other things we're going to do. Balance has a lot to do with, a lot more to do with the brain than just being able to walk, right? That balance center that we so depend on also has a lot to do with how our eyes function and how we read, right?
Mhm.
So somebody with uh, off balance also has a problem oftentimes with reading and comprehension. So we can check both of those. And then we're going to do something that's called a cognitive processing test. So this isn't an IQ test, it is how does your brain process the information that is coming in and how fast. Someone who is processing information very slow is going to be more of something simple like a fall risk. If you're about to step off a curb and your brain doesn't process that information quickly, then you misjudge that, then you're going to fall, right? So this is how these things all kind of come together when we start to look at it.
Mhm.
So eye tracking, cognitive processing, and balance are going to be the three major things that we're going to do when you come in.
And when you do those tests, how g- close in the brain or what areas of the brain can you tell have been or have an injury? Am
So
I asking that right?
you
You
are.
know?
You definitely are. So we can tell a lot about a brain injury, and where it's localized to is kind of what you're asking.
Yes.
So we can tell where it localizes to by figuring out on those tests what is actually functioning and what's not. So
Okay.
if we're doing like the cognitive processing test, it actually breaks it down into different areas, different lobes of the brain.
Okay.
And so we'll be able to tell, is your frontal lobe not functioning or firing? If we're doing balance testing, are we looking at your cerebellum? Is that not firing? If we're looking at how your eyes fixate on a target and we're looking into your brain stem, how is that not firing? So it gives us a very good picture and a more specific picture of how the brain is functioning or not functioning.
Okay. Why do we care about these assessments?
Well, if we have the opportunity to do these assessments and we can really fine tune where those deficiencies are, then that's how you build a very specific treatment plan for that person. So, we may have two people come in with frontal lobe injuries, but it's not cookie cutter. Their frontal lobe, it's a really big lobe, that frontal lobe. And so, somebody with a right frontal lobe injury is going to look a little different than somebody with a left frontal lobe. So we need to really be able to be very specific. And that's what those assessments are going to allow us to do, is be very specific with what it is we're going to do with therapy and how we're going to make this person better.
Okay. Can you give an example of a right frontal lobe versus injury versus a left frontal lobe?
So there's a lot of crossover when we look into the brain, right? But there are some specifics as well. Okay. And so one of the things that's really beautiful is if we get an injury, the other side can oftentimes help and pick up on
Mhm.
some of this. But we see, when we start looking at these, we look at depression and we look at anxiety. Now, we're not specifically targeting depression and anxiety, but when we're dealing with the frontal lobes, we're dealing with depression on one side, anxiety on the other. But that goes for the whole brain. It's not just the frontal lobe, right? So when we start talking about speech centers, well, that's a primary for most people left side. And most people think of your artisticness on your right side, but it's not exclusive. And the more we learn about the brain, the more we realize that there's a lot of crossover, and we don't have such exclusivity to one area, but there's a primary. So right-handed people, their primary stuff is generally going to be on the left side. Left-handed people can have more primary on the right side. Okay. So it's a little bit about getting a history, figuring out where their dominance is, and then figuring out what part of their brain isn't firing specific.
Okay. One question or thought that I had as you're talking about that, and you were going through the depression, the anxiety. One of the things that I've learned, I think, I'm still always learning something every time I go in the clinic, which is why I love being in there. But these things, the depression, the anxiety, the stress, those are actually, if I, those are how the brain injury is presenting itself.
Correct.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so while you're not treating depression
Right.
or anxiety, you're actually getting the brain to fire or function at its optimal. And then when it does, we'll see the anxiety and the depression start to slip away
Absolutely.
because the brain's firing. Same with the hormones. Once that we don't want them to be on hormones forever or supplements, once you've fired that brain up those areas to start producing what it's supposed to be, now we can watch the body start to heal itself, which
Right.
is a beautiful thing about
Absolutely.
our bodies and how they're designed and made um, to basically heal itself
Right.
if the brain's firing correctly.
Exactly. So that's always a goal. If we have to put someone on any type of chemistry, supplementation, anything, our goal is to then repeat those lab tests in 90 to 120 days, because that's when our bodies have this complete cellular turnover. And what we're doing, keeping that in mind, is being able to take people off of that of supplementation and such, right? We don't want anyone to have to be on this long term. However, there are some people that do, right? There are some people that will be on medications forever. There are some people that may be on supplementation forever, but that's never the goal. If we can get that brain and that body firing, and we can, help with some lifestyle changes and help restore energy so that you can go out and do the things that you used to love to do, which is hiking and walking and biking and whatever those movement patterns are, then we can oftentimes decrease a bunch of that. And that's long-term goals, right? Have your brain and body fire and work the way it's supposed to.
Okay. That's again one of the reasons I love being in the clinic is learning these things and watching it happen.
Right.
Watching in just 2 short weeks these veterans, and I'm going to say veterans because that's who we work with. Dr. Gaudet also does see civilians because brain injuries aren't limited to just the veterans. It just happens to be our space. But watching them start to sleep again and having 8 hours of sleep when they haven't slept, and then you start to see their faces change and
in a matter of days.
It just very, very short amount of time, which is so life changing, which is why we're so excited about what we're doing for brain injury.
Yes. One of the things that, and Donna, mentioned this, one of the reasons she likes to come into the clinic is because it energizes her again. It reminds her of why we do what we do every day. And we truly are passionate and enjoy what we do. We love it. And one of the things we do get to see is on day 2 or day 3 of therapy. Some people, the veterans, are almost always on a 2-week intensive. And the civilians, they're welcome to do those intensives, or we can spread them out, kind of depending on how their brain is working as well. But to see them after 24 hours or 48 hours be able to sleep for the first time in years, that's huge, right? And to have them come in and question, can my brain really start to repair this quick? And the answer is yes, right? We just have to figure out what's impeding its ability. And once we figure that out and we can get that brain to fire and you can sleep, amazing things happen.
And we see it over and over.
Right.
It really is almost miraculous. It's simple, but it's powerful for sure.
Powerful.
So as we finish out our live today, if you have any questions about a brain injury, you're welcome to send a note to us at defendersoffreedom.us or resiliencybh.com. Dr. Gaudet, Dr. Eisenmann will answer, or Jody or myself will answer. Thank you.